woodworking is fun, and guitar playing is of course one of my hobbies.
Passions, yeah.
Yeah, it's a passion, hobby. Started when I was 12, and that's in lots of bands, as you know. I've been in many when I was younger and teenager and my 20s and all that. But you don't have time for it after a while. Like life gets in the way.
It does.
Right?
It does.
You have kids, you have business, you do all that. So I don't play that often anymore.
Okay.
Probably once, if I pick it up once a week, I'm lucky,
Okay.
at this point.
For those of you that are just joining us, we're at Touchstone Talks, and we're meeting with partner Steve Pappas. Who is a woodworking enthusiastic and has just shared with us some life lessons. So we're going to continue to talk with him and his role at Touchstone and how he works with owners.
Thanks. I appreciate it. One of the things I was thinking of today as we were going to get together was, what is it that, that's important to me in working with a client? And one of the things that's important is absolutely kind of brutal honesty. Honesty is important because you don't want to mislead a client with kind of giving them what they want to hear. That's, I think, a cardinal rule that I live by, and I think we live by at Touchstone. So if you have a client that they're either, let's say, they're not ready to sell, or there's a lot of problems, or in many cases where we would recommend just don't do it and wait for a year or two or 5 years, or maybe whatever the situation is, and that honesty, I think, is a fundamental cornerstone of at least what I've learned, and what my camarada who founded Touchstone, he taught me. He taught me when I joined Touchstone that it's extremely important to have a high level of integrity and professionalism when it comes to working with clients, and that goes a long way, even if it is not in, our best interest.
Often it is not in our best interest.
Right. So many times you and I have had clients where, we could have recommended X, something to do, which would have benefited us, but that's never the right thing to do. So that's important. And also another thing too is in the M&A world, there are a lot of, we'll call it not so savvy M&A people out there. I saw a lot of that when I was in the business brokerage world. Business brokerage is really kind of the level below the M&A where it...
So let's stop just a second and let's define our terms a little bit, because I don't know that all of our listeners know the difference between business brokerage and M&A. Business brokerage is smaller, more Main Street.
Main Street. It's all Main Street. So I was a business broker when I first got into this whole industry. I was a business broker first for 10 years, and it's completely different. It's the equivalent to a residential real estate person versus a commercial real estate person. It's even more than that. You're dealing with, think about walking down Main Street. You have restaurants, you have dry cleaners, you have pizzerias, you have clothing stores, you have a hardware store. All of those types of businesses, they're great businesses. They're run by an individual typically, and the owner takes pride in it. But it is only being sold. Typically, the buyer is going to be an individual in most cases, 99% of the time. You're not dealing with corporations. You're dealing with an individual buyer who was essentially buying themselves a career, buying themselves a job. That whole world, I did that for 10 years. And it's like guerrilla warfare in a way. You're in the trenches. You realize how hard these people work. They're survivalists. They will do whatever it takes to survive and to make a profit. The downside is after 10 years of doing that, you just get tired of, let's say, to put it mildly, their accounting practices aren't the best. Okay. Many cases I would walk into a business owner a liquor store, for example, or a wine shop, or it would be, whatever, it doesn't matter. And when you talk to them about their financial records, many cases they're like, hey, there's a box, so there's a shoebox, and there it is. There's all my receipts in there, and that's it. They meet with their accountant once a year.
They have a tax return.
That's it. In many cases, there's not even QuickBooks or any type of accounting thing. It's sometimes they just use an old fashioned one write system, which is
Ledger.
checks, ledger, which is checks. And again, don't get me wrong. These are wonderful people that have they've put their kids through college. They've done all the right things, but it's a different world.
Okay.
And, that's different than we'll call it the lower middle market M&A. The lower middle market are businesses typically with $10 million or more, 10 to 100 million, more like manufacturing companies, distributors, B2B services, companies that really have things like a management team. They might have a CFO, in many cases, or a controller, a VP of sales. If the owner's smart, they've kind of pulled themselves out of the, maybe out of the day-to-day or certainly out of a sales role in the company. That's the world that I live in, we live in now.
Correct.
At Touchstone. So the two are important, and there are many people that are business brokers that do a great job. But, I reached a point in my life that I got tired of doing that. And I really wanted to elevate into, larger transactions and deal with companies that really had a legitimate accounting department and a legitimate, accounting firm that would do financial statements for them and all the normal things. And that was kind of a breath of fresh air.
Okay. Is that what attracted you to M&A?
Yeah, that's what attracted me from being in a Main Street to, I'll say, the M&A world. Prior to that, just so people know, and I've told you this before, but I came from the tech industry, so I went. I'm not the M&A advisor, M&A person that has.
You're not a finance broker.
I'm not I don't have the MBA.
Right.
Okay. I didn't go to Harvard, Yale, and with a finance major, then get the MBA. I went a completely different track. I went to a technical high school. The same technical high school that trains plumbers and electricians and all that. And I took electronics at the time. And then I went off to get an electrical engineering degree. Once I did that, went into the computer industry. The computer industry back then, this is in the 80s. This is mainframe stuff. This is not PCs. The PC wasn't even invented yet. It wasn't even introduced till early in the 80s by IBM. And so I was a technician. I installed systems. I troubleshooted them. And I was in the whole industry for, probably 25 years. Eventually, I just got tired of it, and I wanted something different. I knew someone that was a business broker. And I said, what is that about? Like, what do you do? I don't even know it even existed. Like, do people do that? And he said, yeah, this is how it works, and blah, blah, blah. So I just quit my job. And I jumped in with both feet, and I was with this one individual as partnership with him for a couple of years, and I went on my own. But it is what's really rewarding in the whole M&A world to me is we actually change people's lives. I believe we do. They are ready for the next phase, and that's very satisfying to me. As a salesperson in the computer industry, you sell software, you sell hardware, you're not changing anyone's life. This is satisfying.
Okay. So helping with the exit is your favorite part.
It is.
Okay.
It's my favorite part because you have someone who is taken over from a company that was maybe started by their grandfather, and then their father took over, and now they are working hard to keep it going, to grow it. And then they reach a point in their life where they have to make a decision. Usually it's because of age. They're reaching a point where now they either transfer the company to their kids, And in many cases, the kids don't want the business, and that's becoming a popular kind of common theme now. A lot of the clients that come to me, the conversation is, my kids are, great. We love them, but they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're doing other things. They don't want dad's aerospace, precision manufacturing company. So it's a bitter pill to swallow for them. It's emotional, but at the same time, we can do something for them to, kind of give them the value they deserve for building their business and continuing that legacy for many years. And I believe that makes me feel really good.
Yeah, we definitely do build legacy. The companies grow to a certain level that they're at now, and the ideal exit is one that lets that company continue to grow, so that the founder, and I mean, we've got one that's 3 generations.
Yeah.
That's
and it's highly emotional. I mean, and rightfully so. And a lot of people ask me, is the owner just interested in, the highest price or to get the most money? And, maybe in some cases, yes, but I say the majority of the time, that's not the case.
I am surprised about the number of times that the client, when faced with all the offers, picks the second highest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they liked them better.
Yeah. Better.
They felt more comfortable turning their business over to them.
Yeah.
They thought they'd be better to protect their employees.
Yeah, because their employees are their family. And we hear that often, right? So the employee, this is my family, whether it's my management team and then all the other employees that are in on the shop floor or whatever, they want to take care of them. And that's an important thing. They don't want, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, they don't want the buyer to come in, like I'll mention, private equity, for example. We sell, quite a few businesses to private equity. But as long as it's negotiated up front, and they know the requirements of our client, the seller, the owner, they don't want to violate the wants of the owner. They don't want to violate the fact that the culture of the business is a certain way, and that matching that culture is a big part of what
might be the hardest part of diligence.
It is,
right? How do you make sure the culture of one company fits into the culture of the other?
And
company?
A lot has to do with calling, even calling and talking to previous acquisitions that a PE firm, for example, or even a strategic company, if they're in a growth mode, they're buying 3 or 4 or 5 companies a year and they're growing. And one of the things that is important for, the founder, the business owners that's looking to exit, is to have conversations with people that that the buyer has already acquired in the past. How did it go? How did you feel? Did they, screw you in any way? Did they take care of you?
Right.
Did they take care of your people? Those are really important things. So it is multifaceted. Is as you said, it is not the highest price. I've had many management meetings where we're down to the top 4 or 5 potential buyers, and we set the meetings up so they can meet the owner and so on, and we encourage them. It's a 2-way street, so they have to, the buyer is going to come in and say, hey, here are all the great things we could do for you and for your people, and here's why we're a perfect fit. And then the owners will get a chance to ask questions to the potential acquirer. And I've had situations where we've walked out of that meeting and they've said, no,
not selling to them.
Never selling to them. I don't care what they offer, not doing it. And that proves something to me. That proves there's some integrity with our client. It's not just about the money. And they just, they want to feel that these people are going to be taken care of. So that's a big part of, I think, the process.
Yeah. The only time I've seen an owner pick a buyer based on dollar amount singly, was one of the hardest to get closed.
Yeah.
Because they were only motivated by the dollars and cents.
Yeah.
And every negotiation was more and more painful.
Yeah. And I think us in our process, in Touchstone's process, it's really important for a client to understand all the different steps along the way. And it's, first of all, it's never easy. Okay. It's, that's a fact that I'll tell everybody. It's never easy. At the end of the whole process, they're usually going to say, "Hey, I'd love that. Let's do it again." They're never
No, they're never saying that.
They're never saying
They're going to say, "Thank God it's over."
They're going to say, "Thank God it's over," especially when you get to the point of LOI and then you have to get to a closing, and there's all that due diligence and all the things that are now, the buyer wants to see, triplicate of everything under a microscope. But if we've done our job properly, and if the seller is operating a legit, well-oiled machine, there's a lot to it, but usually you don't really, hopefully, uncover any surprises. That's the thing that can hurt a deal at the end is if we didn't disclose something, or the seller or client didn't disclose something. That's usually the kiss of death in a deal.
Yeah. Yeah. We say between us, go ugly early.
Go ugly early.
Go ugly early. So if there's a problem and you know it and the business operates fine with it.
Yeah. You have to
be open and honest
right
at the
front.
Beginning, because
and plus you eliminate all the people that just can't stomach that. They're
right.
already out of the deal, right?
Right.
Okay, self-selected out. So you don't have to worry, and you've kind of you've gone and solved that one hurdle right out of the gate, and then from that point on, now you're dealing with, we'll call it more serious buyers, because they already know the situation, right. Whatever it is, like maybe our customer concentration is X, or another good example that I've learned is some, precision manufacturing companies, for example, they also, let's say one of their clients or customers might be in the firearm business, for example. Okay. And there's a lot of PE firms that are like dead set against that. They will never, and it's in their bylaws, right, that all their investors will say
they've raised money based on not supporting certain things,
and that's fine. That's their opinion.
That's their fund. They get to decide it.
Right. But you have to, but the point is you say it up front.
Right.
Why bother getting down the path of weeks later or months later saying, "Oh, by the way, this," and now you've wasted all that time. Right. You want to go ugly early. These are things, or they've had financial hiccups in the past.
People will overlook it, but it just shapes who your right buyer is.
That's right.
The other thing that always astonished me is you can put out the same company with the same numbers, and you get feedback that clashes
widely.
So, too small, too big, wrong industry,
right.
Love the industry, hate the product.
Right.
Like everybody's coming from their own perspective.
And that ties into, the three marketplace principles that Mike Camerata taught me when I first joined Touchstone, a dozen years ago now. Basically rule number one, each potential buyer will offer and see value completely different for the same identical business, right? Same financials, just like you said, same financials, same product line, same employees, same services. Some will see value there, some won't. Okay. And if they do make offers eventually, they'll be all over the place, because the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So that's how that was. Principle number two, the one with the most opportunity will typically be your best buyer. And that seems common sense, but it's important to understand there are ones that see opportunity beyond the dollars and cents. For example, they might need the technology. They might need the employees, the people. They might need the geographic location. These are things that
they might want the customers.
They want just the customers, right? Because maybe they make products that they can cross-sell into this whole other market, okay? And then the third principle that's really, I believe, critical in the way we bring a business to market is that you'll never get the highest offer from an acquirer unless they know that there's competition.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fundamental difference, and that's one of the differences between, let's say, Main Street and the M&A. Main Street, you typically put a price tag, right? So I have a restaurant. I'm asking, $800,000 with it's a list price, it's an asking price, and then you get offers from there. In our world, the fact that we don't put a price is really critical, and the fact that we put buyers in competition with one another, that's so critical. And a lot of business owners go, why do you do that? Why not just ask? Because if you ask, we'll just use random numbers, you ask $10 million, now you've set the high water mark. Right. No one's ever going to go above that.
I'll say they could have come in at 10.5 or at 11.
11. We've been surprised, right?
I've been surprised.
We've had situations where the value range might be 9 to 10, and we get $14 million offers.
Well, and it is back to those three things that create value. They either wanted the location, they wanted the customers, they wanted the industry. It added the opportunity and value to them.
Yeah.
Or they looked at our numbers and said, I see 100 ways to cut costs.
Right. A synergistic buyer will reduce those expenses. In many cases, they might already have a CFO, already have accounting department. All those things are ways that they could trim and make the EBITDA, make the profit much higher. And then also knowing there's competitors, because
nobody likes to lose.
No one likes to lose. Now, once they've committed to wanting it, then the fact that they have a competitor or two that they know is kind of in the market, they're going to want to sharpen their pencil. And that makes a big difference, I think.
Definitely. I want to touch on Exit Advantage. Exit Advantage is something that Touchstone does that's a little unique.
Yeah.
So tell us about Exit Advantage.
So Exit Advantage is a program that we've developed, and it came about because many of the clients coming to us were coming to us kind of when they're ready to sell. So a typical call with an owner might be, hey, I've owned this business for 25 years. I'm now 68 years old, or I'm 70. I want to sell, and I'd like to get started immediately, and I want to close by the end of the year. That's a very common conversation. Our typical process is 9 to 12 months from soup to nuts to do everything. And that's if everything goes right. And what I have noticed is that if they only had come to us a year before, or 2 years, or 3 years, there are many things that they could have done that were not complicated, but they could have done to improve the value of their business. And they didn't do that. So Exit Advantage is developed and designed specifically for business owners that aren't ready now. They do not want to sell now, but they have an intention to sell, we'll say, the next 2 to 5 years. Now, it could be longer, it could be 10 years, but it doesn't matter. But they're not ready today. So my concept, or our concept, is use this valuable time to prepare your business for an exit. Because to maximize the value, there are many things that you can do. There are, we analyze over 10 different functional areas of the company, not only financials, but operational, management teams, financial reporting, products and service, you name it. There's an assessment that's done in all key areas. And the reason is to identify areas of weakness that need improving. Okay. And if those areas could be identified, let's say 5 years early, there's a valuable time that shouldn't be wasted to improve that company. Because in the end, even if you never sell, you have a better company.
Right.
What's there's no downside. No. Right. And the thing is, you have to have, an ownership who feels and recognizes that there are things that they can improve in their business. A lot of owners don't want to think about that. Their nose is on the grindstone, and they're just trying to do the best they can. But if we could come in from the outside and taking a perspective from an acquirer's perspective, because we know what acquirers look for, right? We deal with them every day, hundreds of them. And if they could prepare their business, then at the end, when they do decide, if they decide to sell, and when they decide, they have a much more valuable company. And that's the basics.
We won't have to go ugly early.
We won't have.
Fixed the
That's
ugly.
right. We fixed the ugliness, right?
Yep.
So if they have a customer concentration that needs to be resolved, or if they have financial books that are just messed up, they need someone, an outside professional, to help. There are many times that we're gonna see what we get at the end, and if they don't do Exit Advantage, they come to us. It pretty much is what it is.
Right.
You just
Well, 'cause
do.
You're looking at last 12 months.
Yeah.
You're looking at, there's very little in the rear view that you can do.
You can't
fix
You
those
can't.
items.
Right.
You can't.
Very,
it is what
very
it is.
little. You could do some changing in the future, but since you're going to market in the the next 90 days or so, there's no time to prove any of the improvements. Where if you came 5 years before and we said, you should do this, 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 and this, those are really important things to do on the priority list. Now you're not going to do everything.
No.
You're going to take the top areas,
The ones that fix easiest.
that need help, and if you can get those done at the end of the cycle when you've done them, and it's now 3 or 4 years later, boy, you've added millions, in many cases millions, to the value of your business, where before you just leave that on the table.
Right.
It's just a fact. So very few companies that are in the M&A world that I know do this. And I just, we're officially launching it shortly. We have a new website coming out, hopefully within the next 30 days. So it's going to be, I think, a very popular program for our clients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have one last signature question.
Okay.
You've had several careers, so you've probably thought about this before. If you weren't doing M&A right now, what career would you be doing instead?
What career? Okay, so that's an interesting question. I mentioned my hobbies. Hobbies are fun. Would I be a musician playing in a band? There's a high likelihood of that happening. Or the woodworking piece of it. Would I be owning a millworking company, or would I be involved with that? That's a possibility. But here's the problem with that. Hobbies are great, but when you turn them into a career, it becomes a job, right? All of a sudden, it's not the luxury. The amount of time I spend building a table, I'd have to charge $20,000 for that table in order for me to recoup.
Very expensive
Very
table.
expensive too. So you all of a sudden you have to turn a hobby into a business, and and then that changes the dynamics. But if I absolutely wasn't doing this, it would probably want to be one of those two things.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for your time today. It's been great to catch up.
Thank you, Deborah. It was wonderful. Joe Rogan did call me, but I decided to come here instead.
Excellent.